Hello, Memorial. This is Jason Thornton, Tim Rush with our post-sermon conversation following our focus. This week in Lion versus Lion, we're looking at the second part of Revelation. I encourage you, if you haven't heard that message, very powerful. Another great Bible Project video, really does a fantastic job with the book of Revelation. And so to start us off in general, Tim, how did you feel the sermon went? And I don't know, what stuck out to you?
Well, these Bible Project videos to me are just fascinating. 22 minutes to cover the 22 chapters of Revelation. And maybe it's the way my mind works, but it really is helpful for me to watch what is being said, being drawn out in real time, and seeing the scope of the book and how it flows together and what the main themes come back to over and over again. I would say if anybody hasn't watched those videos, I would go back and watch those. And I don't mean the sermons. The sermons are great. But the videos, the Bible Project, you looking at the book of Revelation, man, that's just gold, I think.
Yeah, I remember so we're talking about this in the summer, and I was thinking, man, we have to spend some time in Revelation. We just have to. We're talking about living in the victory, but man, that gets so convoluted. But I also don't want to just say, hey, in the first couple chapters, you have the 7 churches, and then you skip a few chapters, and now we want it all, and he's right on the white horse, So I was just looking, and I remember when I first saw Bible Project's version, 22 minutes for 22 chapters, I thought, there is no way. This is going to be not good. And despite the fact that their other stuff has been very good, but yeah, I was really blown away. And I've now seen it probably 4 times in total, both segments. And yesterday I'm watching it, as part of watching your sermon, and still new stuff is coming out, And one of the things I think they do so very well is they will say, look, some people have this perspective and some people have this perspective, but here's absolutely what we know.
Yeah.
And I just really appreciate that. I feel like that honors the Dialego spirit of, look, if you think there's going to be 1,000-year reign, or I know people that think Jesus came back, 80, 70. And so you throw that one in the mix too. But at the end of the day, here is kind of what the book of Revelation says. And I think that's probably the most concise, respectful way I've ever heard it dealt with. In the way that they process it. So I thought that's just very effective.
Yeah. A week ago, whenever you were preaching and you presented the video, we watched the video, and you went back up and you said, man, I have my sermon prepared. There's a lot of other things I want to say right now, but I'm going to try not to. Like, I was sitting there going, I want to know the other stuff. I want to know what's hitting you at the moment. Right. And it does strike me that we have a lot of people that I would love to know what is their takeaway from it. What is their one thing that captures them? I was even thinking about in Amherst and then in Guadalajara. So it's not 20 years ago, but it's not far from 20 years ago. I was spending a lot of time studying the minor prophets, and a lot of themes from the minor prophets, particularly the day of the Lord, kept coming up. Like it seemed like I kept seeing that in this Bible Project video. And so it makes me wonder where you are drawn to, what might speak to you differently. If you're drawn to happy marriages, did you hear something in there about the marriage of heaven and earth that would sound different to you than it would to me? How God meets us where we are at is what I mean by that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, before the video, you prefaced it by talking about history and just the brilliance of having the source, a primary source being the Bible, and just the amazing testimony, the evidence of all of these manuscripts, and the amazing coherence of all these different authors, and over these thousands of years. It really is amazing. And then still here we have Revelation that we can unpack it yesterday, and then we can unpack it a year from now and learn something, and then we can unpack it a year from then and here, it's just the beauty of that source material from God. I mean, to me, the Bible itself speaks to the brilliance and the all-knowing nature of God, that it still is so powerful today and still a mystery to us.
Yeah. There was a tangent that I was tempted to go down when unpacking that and it would be totally unnecessary, but sometimes your mind goes one place and you feel like you've got to chase that rabbit. But I was thinking about the parables and how they're so hard to understand, what the scope of them, and the idea that Jesus was using those on purpose, that he didn't give a 1, 2, 3 kick sermon outline. He gave stories that he relied on the people to draw their conclusions from, which is not how we do things today. We do not, and I mean our American culture, we do not allow for somebody else to draw their conclusions. We see public speaking or communication as it's the speaker's responsibility to be understood. Whereas in other cultures, it is the listener's responsibility to understand. And so the speaker puts it out there, and the listener has to fight with it and decide what's the meaning there, which as an American, it's horrible. It's really hard to live in a culture where the speaker isn't in charge of the understanding, the listener is. But to know Jesus actually used that in the culture to teach today. Like there was purpose in him giving these vague ideas and letting the listener decide this is how that applies in my today. It was just fascinating how the Bible still works.
It does. And I think, we have, in my mind right now, you have two separate issues. It's the interpretation you received as a child, or maybe even as a young adult. And then there's your own journey with the Bible. And for some people that never diverges. Whatever they received as a child, that's what it is. And then there's others that are constantly learning new things, being taught new things. It truly is a living and active document that continues to cut us and separate us and call us to better. And this is the challenge I think we have when we're talking about the Word of God to people, is because, and I just listed two dynamics. There's a billion different variables there. But when you say it, even in you talking about this is a history source, I wonder how many ways that the listener heard that, positive and negative. It's just a fascinating dynamic based on the experience that they've had with it. For me, it speaks life and surety, and it's amazing the Bible even exists. I mean, so many times they tried to destroy it and put it out of existence, and still it's like the number one selling book, and this kind of thing. And I just think, I don't know, it's just really amazing. But I think other people could hear it and be like, it's false and it's propaganda, and how can you trust it? It's 2,000 years ago or whatever.
I just happened to catch a news report on, forgive me for not knowing her name, the woman that's up for the Supreme Court. And a talk show guy is saying, hey, we should roast her over her religious beliefs, because having religious beliefs basically means she's crazy. And so we're talking about crazy people. And it's just fascinating, the different takes people can take on very simple statements that are put out there.
Yeah, absolutely. You talked about in the beginning, and then you came back at the end, the idea of two perspectives. And I'm going to say this, and you correct me, because this is what I think I heard you say. One is just the perspective of looking through John's eyes of what God was showing him and trying to understand what applies, what speaks to us. And then the other perspective is watching ourselves in regards to what we're learning. So it's like stepping outside further, and it's like watching me watching John, or watching John's story unfold. And I thought that was really good. I think what I hear you say is or the point that I feel that gets us to, it's just another perspective on, we want to gather the facts given, the discernible truths given, maybe is a better word. Simultaneously, though, we're prone to stop there and not take the next step and say, where does this, again, back to the cutting, where does this truth of God cut me? Where does this truth of God bring life? Where does this truth of God show up? And at the end, you talk about in your living room and in your home and in the job you're looking for, and even placing in terms of, we've been looking through the lens of love the Lord your God with all your mind. And now I want us to shift to loving the Lord your God with all your strength. And so unpack that a little bit for me. Just elaborate more on kind of what you're thinking around those.
Yeah. I think it dawned on me that I liked that panoramic view of Revelation because I'm stepping back and I'm getting perspective. And generally when I'm reading, like I like the first few chapters of Revelation because it's talking about the 7 lampstands and the churches and messages to those. And I can follow that and I can track that. But then you've got bulls and horns and beasts and a woman and a dragon. And I'm like, I'm lost here. Because if I get lost on one, then the rest of it just gets more confusing. And the way it does it, it feels like, we're getting perspective and we're seeing how this plays out. And I realize that is, and this is a judgment, but I think that God has made us to where we can connect with him in one of those ways more likely than in others. And I think for me, mind works well. Like I can love God with my mind. That's the place I feel comfortable, where I can step back and I can get perspective, and I love it. I like doing that. But loving God with all my strength, that gets more tricky because that requires that I actually move and I make a change and I do something different. And as a 9 on the Enneagram, it's easier for me to sit in a place of perspective and watch. That's easier than stepping in and doing something that could be risky because I could mess up or I could do it wrong, and doing it wrong could hurt somebody. And so it's better for me to just sit back and watch. So I what I believe is we all have one of those: heart, soul, mind, and strength, that we do better than the others, and we're comfortable there, and we should honor that in each other. That, hey, look at this guy who knows how to love God with his soul, and this guy who knows how to love God with his heart. And then in my case, I need to own, and I'm pretty weak with it in my strength. And if that's the case, I know, hey, there's some work for me to do. This is something that whenever I see action steps, for me, it's decisiveness. Like I just don't want to make a decision. But I know that about me. And so whenever I realize that's what's happening here, then I can say, okay, I will make a decision and I hope this goes right. But I'll take steps. So I don't know if that's answering your question very well, but that's a piece to what I was thinking there.
Yeah. And I don't want to go down we can go anywhere we want, but I just specifically in line of what you were saying. So the loving the Lord your God with all your mind is, I am saying, God, teach me. I want to learn. I'm paying attention. In this particular study, we're looking at lion versus lion. We're looking at living in the victory, and we're looking at the final drawing, if you will, from the Bible Project. And you're seeing that perspective. It's mental. It's like, oh, that's how that fits together. And that makes sense to me. And it's those kind of things. And then you're shifting now is in strength. It's like, what will you do with this? use the term, what is your therefore? In other words, if this is true, so what? Therefore I will do. And that's with the strength. And by strength, it could mean you're going out and serving people or using your physical strength to do that. And it could mean the strength of will to say, I see a habit in here. So something that jumps out to me is when you say that, is the dynamic of, do I live as a person that has the victory when I want to complain? Yeah. Okay. So, and because I feel like if I'm in from God, I'm like, I'm a man of unclean complainers from a people of unclean complainers. Like we were experts at complaining and looking at 95% good and noticing and focusing on the 5% bad, And so I'm like, okay, on one hand, there are times I need to say, okay, here's what happened, to kind of conceptualize it. We might call that venting, but on the other hand, when does that cross over to I'm not living as if I have the victory? Sometimes I can be so self-absorbed. It's not that I mean to be rude to my family, because you had said in your living room, in your home, but I'm just flippant with them, and I'm not caring, in my responses. And it's usually because I'm distracted with something that I like to be doing, whatever that is, And so that's how that jumps out at me, is this really, and this gets into another part of what you're talking about, that we are, as the bride, we are the pearly gates. We are the street of gold, this kind of thing. Yeah. And that dynamic of I'm made for better than getting stuck in my complaining. And that's the issue. Yeah. It's not having the complaint, it's getting stuck in it.
Yeah, it's like thinking about the minor prophets. For me, I love to step back and get perspective. Okay, in this is historical context, this is what Obadiah is about. And these are who the Edomites are. And this is why it was offensive for them to turn their back on the Israelites, because they're Esau's people turning their backs on Jacob's people, and they should have cared for the cousins, and they didn't. And so here's the context. And so that's putting the panoramic view and understanding it. And that's what I like. Mm-hmm. So then the other perspective that I was asking about was, okay, but now look at yourself reading it and notice for you, where do you feel like there could be judgment about you? To take it from, this is what the Edomites did. Those Israelites, they were so silly. That it's so much easier to keep it at arm's length. But then when I turn the view and look at me reading it, then I have to own with Revelation. I really do trust in our economic security in the United States. Yeah. I really do trust in our military safety. In fact, I have been places in the world where what made me feel safe was somebody in America will go fight for me and get me out of this place. Later on, when I found out that wasn't true, it got scary.
Right.
But that's true. We trust our economics. We trust our military might. And so what jumped out at me in this, as they're unpacking that in the video, is, and they demand that you give your allegiance to that. It's like, oh my goodness, that is where we live. And it's so hard to say, I'm not giving my allegiance to anything other than God. Well, then that gets really hard. So it's good for me to have that perspective of, that makes me feel really uncomfortable. And that's why I would like to pretend like that part isn't there. That's not a part of the video. But if I can get perspective of me watching the video, then I can own, that's, if I'm feeling that dart in my soul, then it's something that I can look at and try to work on and try to do better. It's easy to read the minor prophets, or it's easy to read Revelation and pretend like It doesn't matter to my family at 5 o'clock tonight when we're eating dinner together. That's harder to do, but and I'm saying too much here, but Jesus saying, my mother and my brothers are those who hear my words and put them into practice. And I feel that same separation there, where I'm all about hearing his words. Like I want to hear, what does Jesus say? And that's what our small groups are designed to do, where we come together and say, what did we hear from God this week? I have a hang up though in helping others. And how do we put those words into practice? That's a harder step for me, because that requires action and it requires decisiveness. And anytime I'm called upon to be decisive, somebody may get hurt who wouldn't make the decision I would make. And so let me sit in this place of perspective and not in this place that requires my movement with it.
Right. Yeah. And I think that part that you talked about the country, not just the country, but the people had come to the world, had come to trust in the military or the financial power. And I would add to that list the pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
You make me feel good. This makes me feel good. And that's a broad thing. I mean, Babylon is featured as the prostitute there, but I think it's just think of how much in my life is simply about, I like it. I prefer it. Besides specific things I sacrifice for my family, and by sacrifice, that's a bit too much, but it's because I like it. I have what I want when I want it. And that feels like the American way, that feels like, well, I'm owed that, because the pursuit of happiness means I should be happy all the time, and if I'm not, then I need to do something. But I'm basically worshiping those three things, And I remember in the book of Revelation where it talks about the people that are watching from afar when Babylon is being destroyed, and they're just overtaken with emotion because that's their whole security. Mm. Like, where else are they going to go? So so we jump ahead a month, 6 months, 10 years, whatever, and we're sitting out in the Atlantic Ocean watching the United States burn, and we know, let's say we knew that was coming. I'm not prophesying. I'm just saying, using this as a word picture. And would I just be, well, why am I even alive then? I should just die. If America's not here anymore, then I should just die. And then when I say that out loud, I'm like, really? Is that where my confidence is? And I think we really skew when we say God puts the people, the leaders who he wants. And so we pray for our leaders because the Bible says pray for our leaders. And I believe that. I believe we should pray for our leaders. But it doesn't say then build your confidence on the financial or military or pleasure providers in your life. And that's the step beyond. When I'm praying for a leader, I'm first and foremost praying for their soul. I'm not praying that I can be a part of a superpower and never have any fear and, find my confidence in our military might. I'm praying for God to work with that leader. And clearly we have people that God put into office, office for generations, for centuries, that we would be like, oh, that was a terrible leader. Yeah. And so he's saying, pray for those very people who would say, that's a terrible leader.
I assume you've read articles from the Babylon Bee before, but there was a headline recently that said something like,
so this is a farcical news thing about evangelical Christianity. Is that true? Is that good? Okay.
Yeah, pure satire.
Satirical. There we go.
In fact, if for sport, you could share articles and on Facebook and watch people get upset about them because they don't know they're satire. Like I've not done that on purpose, but I shared years ago, a church that had a water slide into their baptism, into their baptistry, and people were upset about it. I knew this day was coming. I was like, hey, satire. Right. But
yeah, it's a joke.
Yeah. But there was an article that said American pastor considers putting his faith in God when he realizes the Supreme Court has failed him again. And I thought, oh my goodness, that's really convicting,
Yeah, it
because
is.
we put our hope in other people. And just like you said, God said, pray for them.
Mhm.
Yes. He didn't say put your hope in them.
That's right.
And man, it's just a battle. It is a battle that it takes me back to you talking about the chairs that we have to ask ourselves consistently. Hey, which chair am I in right now? Is my praying for this? Am I starting to put hope in it, or am I praying for it? And man, it's a constant everyday reexamination.
Yeah, so I want to jump to something you said that I thought was just really good. By the way, the DVR illustration, I love that illustration. I thought if you haven't heard Tim's lesson, go listen to that, because I thought it was framed especially well with your kids in the room and you knowing something they didn't know. And I just started to think how many times I'm around people, even if they're Christians, that don't believe we're really winning. And so functionally, I know something they don't know, and how I can be the most confident, the most excited, the most enthusiastic person in the room. And I can still have bad days, and I can still grieve, and I can, so it's not saying I always have to wear a fake smile. It's just the idea of knowing, man, this is going to turn out good. But one thing you just grabbed that I didn't catch, I knew it was there, but the idea of the leaves, the healing is in the leaves. Now there's 12 trees, and it's more than that. It's lining. I can't remember the exact verbiage there, but it says in the healings and leaves for the basically the problems of the nations. And you turned that phrase and you said, this is an unhealable problem. Like there's no way we can imagine. These are deep, deep wounds that are national wounds. I mean, just think about the
Yeah.
wars that have been raging for decades, around various things, especially in the Middle East. And then he's like, I take this leaf, and I'm going to take this a little bit different direction, although you can go wherever you want. But I'm taking this leaf and I'm breaking it off and I'm healing it with a leaf. It reminds me of Brian Regan jokes when they're little kids and something happens. They're a bike ramp or something, and a kid like breaks his leg. And so you got 5 kids doing emergency surgery there, and all they got's dirt and leaves, and like, put leaves on it, man, and how silly, ridiculous that is. And then somebody has to get chosen to go tell mom that something they were doing that was stupid is now going to lead to, an emergency room visit. And I just think how, and this is one thing I like about Revelation, especially, and I feel like, I don't know, this is a special thing, and it has to do with the street of gold or the pearl or the foundations, is that God picks the most precious things to the Jewish people, stuff that would be so hard to come by. Like we can go buy an ounce of gold, relatively speaking, it's expensive, but I mean, we can go buy gold and jewels we go buy, but to them, it would be even harder. There's people in, poverty, so many of them in poverty, and so many of them, in oppression. And so they can't get, they don't have the American dream and those possibilities of making more money. So he put it, but then when he uses it, he doesn't say that's on your crowns. He doesn't say it's on your houses. He says, we're paving the street with the stuff you think is precious. We're healing people like these unhealable wounds. And we understand those are emotional, psychological, who knows all the dynamics of those wounds. We're healing with leaves. Like we're not calling in our surgeons to heal this.
Yeah.
You understand the biggest problems you have on earth can be handled with a leaf. From heaven. And I think that's really just a cool picture to me, is the things that we think are most precious or most threatening. He's like, I got this. You don't understand how powerful I am.
Yeah.
And I love that picture.
Yeah. At one point I was tempted to go back into Ephesians about how we are how we are what he uses to teach those in the unseen realms. And we can't fathom it. Like we just can't figure that out. And when he talks about the leaves, he's talking about us. That's in that context of this is my bride. This is my bride. It's also a city. There are leaves. So we have no clue how we get to participate in that, but he's saying, trust me. That I feel like this goes into our next week's. Trust me, the death doesn't win. There's no
Right.
there's no sting. There's no victory from
Yeah.
death.
Yeah, and I think too, the whole, and I have no problem with people saying, man, I can't wait to walk the street of gold, or I can't wait to be in my mansion, this kind of thing. But we have to realize these were pictures that they speak to us, because the street of gold would still be an amazing thing, but they speak to us, but they really spoke to Jewish people. Security was a walled city to a Jewish person, you know.
Yeah.
And that's a dynamic. We don't even think that way. We don't wall our cities, you know,
Yeah.
to provide security. And I think if God were to write Revelation now, he would have different pictures. It would still be the same thing, because we're still in the same space, from my understanding. You know, he hasn't come yet. His second coming hasn't occurred, so we're still in the same boat as the people in, you know, Jerusalem were. But those pictures were specifically written to them, you know, to talk to them. Like when they didn't, I'm not suggesting everybody knew what the church in Ephesus was like, but they knew where Ephesus was in a way we don't.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they had heard stories of Ephesus. They had visited some of that, you know what I mean? So this was more locked in. Now, it's not to say it doesn't have application with us, but these pictures are to give them deep, deep reassurance that he's got it in a way they'd understand. And I think that's really a big deal. So when you say, we know the end of the story because we are the end of the story, I just love that. I mean, this has always been, he talks about us being living stones in First Peter, the idea that we are the temple of God, that we are with him, that, you know what I mean, this dynamic. And so heaven is even a bigger deal. Being with God after this life is over is even a bigger deal than simply saying, oh, we're getting an upgrade, that we're not going to have asphalt, we're going to have gold on our streets.
Yeah.
That's we're missing the point patently. You know what I mean? Instead of just steel gates, we're going to have pearl gates. That's okay. You know, and if that picture encourages you, do it. The point there is, the thing that we think is most precious, he's paving the streets with.
Yeah.
And his point is, you're more precious than this. I will give you everything because this city is my bride.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes me think of the Hebrews 11, that they were looking forward to a city with foundations. And right before that, he makes it very clear they always lived in tents. Like they wandered, they lived in tents. So what would be the ideal for those who always wandered and lived in tents? It'd be a city with firm foundation.
Yeah.
And yeah, so my brother-in-law Eli was talking about that, and about how, so what would be this would be the best way to explain it. Would it be that log cabin in the mountains? Would it be that resort on the beach? Because God is saying, if you can imagine what you think would be the best, it's going to be a little bit better than that, or a little bit. It's going to be beyond.
Yes, absolutely. More than we ask or imagine. And that's true in life, but you have to imagine it's especially true afterlife. And I just think that's an amazing thing.
We were sharing with our small group, Kim was sharing this with our small group last week, that when Quincy was little, maybe 4, I think, we were going to grandma's in California, and we would go with all the cousins to Disneyland. And we're telling Quincy about how awesome Disneyland would be. And there in Guadalajara, we had this pizza place called Peter Piper Pizza. And it was, for a 4-year-old, the ideal place to go for your birthday party, because, like, think of Chuck E. Cheese, not as nice. Yeah, not as many games. Pizza's not as good. But that was Quincy's ideal, the best place he could go. So we're telling him we're going to Disneyland, it'll have this, it'll have that. And he goes, will it be like Peter Piper Pizza? And we were like, if that helps you, that's, and Kim and I are laughing because he is going to be blown away, because might it be as great as Peter Piper Pizza? And we're certain God is doing that with us.
Right.
If that helps you, okay, you know, and it's,
Right.
we can't grasp.
Yes, absolutely. Well, just I've got more stuff, but I love that. I'm grateful for the journey. I thought yesterday was fantastic. It really challenged me in some very specific things, and I just think the truth of the gospel that the God of all creation has reached in and offers us salvation through the blood of His Son. That everybody's desperate for a Savior, and He is beyond happy to provide that, and not just the sacrifice, but everything in Him. I mean, it's just an amazing story, and we just have to hear it again and again and again from dozens of perspectives. You know, so whether the DVR story speaks to you, or the aloe leaf speaks to you, or the perspective and the perspective
Yeah.
speaks to you, it's just I just love that, and obviously that's just a few of a million examples that God leaves us as perspective on just the beauty and the comprehensive nature of His plan for us, to really live into that victory.
Yeah. That Bible Project video, if I think the thing that stood out to me the most is our general is a sacrificial lamb. And that sacrificial lamb will help us. And if you want to say conquer, or if you want to say endure, both of those words are legit. And the way to do both is to be sacrificial like our lamb, to be willing to die to people. And it just felt like, oh my goodness, it's calling us to a victory that is so different than even than what we want. But when you watch it being unpacked, like, yeah, that's what I want to be a part of. That would be where real deep healing can take place.
Love it. Love it. Thank you, man. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for another conversation. That was good stuff.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. See you next week.
Bye.